Hello Bio20 and welcome to our video on muscle fatigue. So today's video is about learning the different types of muscles that are found with anaerobic and aerobic pathways. We know that this two pathways produce either a lot of ATP or not a lot of ATP. And when we contract our muscles, we generate heat. So we're going to talk about the two different types of muscles. So your job today is to be able to tell the difference between a fast twitch and a slow twitch. There's also an intermediate, and then identify the different activities. We're also going to go into and discuss how muscles actually fatigue and how steroids can actually help. Off by talking about the muscle fibers. So you have to remember a muscle fiber is what is part of the muscle fiber bundle, which makes up a muscle. So a muscle fiber is surrounded by sarcolemas, by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and all those things. The first one we're going to talk about is slow twitch. This is the type 1 or aerobic one, which essentially contracts a little bit more slowly, which therefore resists fatigue. It has more endurance. These only tire when your fuel supply is gone. Later in this slideshow, we're going to talk about what do we mean by fuel supply. These ones also have way more mitochondria, hence way more cellular respiration. Therefore, we have more ATP. So more ATP means we can supply the muscle longer, resisting fatigue. It also has a lot more blood vessels, and blood vessels are really important because they supply oxygen, which is really important in cellular respiration. Slow twitch muscles, or type 2 or anaerobic, are pretty much essentially the opposite. They're adapted for generation of power. So sprinting, powerlifting, swinging a hockey stick, swinging a tennis racket, anything that's a quick, fast movement. Sprinting, for example, is what we said here. The other one for slow twitch would mean maybe like a marathon runner, okay? They have little or no myoglobin in them, meaning myoglobin is that compound we talked about earlier that attaches oxygen to the muscle, okay? If they don't really have that, we don't have as much oxygen. If we have less mitochondria, we also have less cellular respiration. So overall, we're producing less ATP with fast twitch muscles. So here are different types of muscles, and you have a space in your notes to draw this picture. So essentially what it's showing is the force of strength of a contraction over time. And it's showing you that the fast twitch muscles, these green ones right here, fast twitch, okay, rapidly reach their strength of contraction and then fatigue quite quickly. So it goes up, fatigues, and down, all right? This one here, this calf muscle, okay, it takes a much longer time for it to fatigue as it reaches its top contraction and then tapers out. This red one is called an intermediate form, or we call them type 2A, or the glycolytic, which you don't need to know, but essentially they're intermediate forms. Now, intermediate forms, surprisingly, are found in people that are wheelchair bound. So people that have paralysis in their body, they actually have much more intermediate forms of these types of muscles than they do fast twitch or slow twitch. So you can kind of think of someone who maybe doesn't do a lot of exercise or doesn't do a lot of working out or has very little mobility. You might see a lot more intermediate forms of muscles in there. Our calf muscle is an example of an intermediate muscle because you can use your calf muscle for a good stretch of time before it fatigues, but it still fatigues pretty quickly. And then our slow twitch muscles take a long time for the strength of the contraction to reach its biggest spot, and then it takes a long, long time for it to fatigue over time as it loses its strength. So those are the three different types. Again, draw this in your note package. We're also going to add in some comparisons between slow twitch and fast twitch. You're going to notice I don't have intermediate here. Again, intermediate is something that exists, but we don't really talk about it a ton. I kind of explained a little bit earlier, but you don't need to know as much about them. So in the world of the contraction speed, so how fast the muscle contracts, slow twitch ones slowly contract, fast twitch ones fast, is kind of where they get their name from. Fatigue-wise, slow ones can resist fatigue, fast ones fatigue quite quickly. So here's where a bunch of different activities are found. So like long distance running, biking, swimming. You can probably think of those more endurance-like sports or endurance-like activities that are needed for slow twitch muscles. Think yoga. Okay, yoga would activate your slow twitch muscles. Things like sprinting, weightlifting, swinging hockey, not hockey stick, tennis racket, any of those kinds of things are going to utilize your fast twitch muscles. So a quick burst of energy and contractions. Now, glycogen levels just means how much glucose we would really have there. And again, we're going to see a little bit of a lower level in slow and a high level in fast. And that's just because glycogen can be broken down quite quickly through a pathway that creates really fast amounts of ATP, but then also produces high amounts of lactic acid. When we look at our muscle, if you looked at a slow twitch muscle, you're going to see a deep red color versus a fast twitch muscle, which is light in color. And that's because of myoglobin. Myoglobin is the part that holds on to oxygen. So when myoglobin and oxygen kind of mix, myoglobin has iron in it. So it helps activate that iron. It creates that deeper red color, where fast twitch muscles don't have as much myoglobin or little to none. So you're not holding on to oxygen the same way. So they're not as dark in color. Again, this plays into this idea of mitochondria. If you have lots of mitochondria in your slow twitch muscles, it means you're going to be able to utilize a lot of oxygen to do cellular respiration. On fast twitch, if you don't have a lot of oxygen, you're also going to have probably a few less mitochondria because you're going to do less cellular respiration. The blood supply, again, is attached to this idea of oxygen. If we're going to have a lot of oxygen present, lots of myoglobin, we're going to have lots of vessels in slow twitch, where the opposite is in fast twitch. Less blood vessels because we don't have as much myoglobin to take on oxygen, so we don't need to supply as much oxygen to those muscles. So this is kind of a couple things of why muscle fatigue. So you kind of already saw a video about why muscles fatigue from your brain, and we call this neural fatigue. And it's essentially when your brain wants to talk to your muscles, it has to send a signal, and over time that signal can be lost, okay? The other form of fatigue comes in what we would call metabolic fatigue, which is the supply issue. So when a muscle fatigues, it's because there's probably a lack of oxygen, so no oxygen, no glucose to go through glycolysis to then go through the process of cellular respiration, so therefore no ATP, and no calcium. Because remember, in order for a muscle to contract, we have to have calcium to remove troponin. Now you'll notice I skipped over lactic acid, and that's because I want to talk about lactic acid a bit more. So originally, the idea of lactic acid was why people thought muscles fatigued. And although it is still true and lactic acid does have an effect, there's lots of other key players. So as your muscle contracts and goes through anaerobic cellular respiration, you produce lactic acid. And it used to believe that the lactic acid coated your muscles and then stopped your muscles from being able to do what it needs to do and creates that soreness as it breaks down. Now, lactic acid's job actually is to stop calcium from entering into the muscle. So we already know no calcium means we can't have a muscle contraction. Lactic acid stops this from occurring. So it's one of the things lactic acid does. So when you have a bunch of these present, you're going to have muscle fatigue. Now, muscle fatigue is different from atrophy. And I'll talk about atrophy right now because atrophy is when you actually no longer can use that muscle. So if we think back to the neural impulse part where we're contracting our muscle because we're sending a message to that muscle, atrophy usually occurs because of that. It's the reduction in size, the tone, and the power of the muscle. Meaning, if your muscle's not getting that stimulation, so the fibers are not receiving that message, that muscle actually becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and it temporarily reduces its size. If you've ever broken a limb and you've worn a cast for an extended period of time, and you take the cast off, you'll notice that that limb appears a little bit smaller than the other one. And that's because for 6 to 8 weeks, you haven't been using the muscles in, let's say, your arm. So those muscles temporarily atrophy or get smaller in size until you can start utilizing them again and growing them bigger. Now, there are some people who have atrophy due to different conditions, and there's something that we can use called steroids. Now, steroids, if we are talking about the synthetic kind, are illegal and not healthy for you. We kind of watched a video about that. But essentially, you have naturally occurring steroids in your body, such as testosterone for both males and females. Cortisol is a type of steroidal hormone, and there's many, many more. If we're talking steroids, people automatically think synthetic steroids or testosterone, synthetic HGH, which is human growth hormone, and these are illegal and considered controlled substances. It's because they're performance enhancers, so they speed up the recovery of your muscle. You work out and you use steroids, your muscles naturally micro tear and make small little tears and then repair through protein synthesis, which is a process in which we repair pieces in our body using proteins. Now, when you use a type of synthetic steroid, you speed up that recovery. Rather than being sore for a couple days and allowing your muscles to heal, you can work out the next day and the next day and the next day and essentially build up massive amounts of muscle. The steroids I want to talk about are not those types of steroids. You can use some synthetic testosterone to actually treat certain conditions, but when we're talking steroids, not all steroids are bad. Some people suffer from weakened muscles or diseases such as multiple sclerosis or MS, or chronic fatigue syndrome, or even people that have atrophy of the muscles from being in a bed or in a chair for a long time. These people have reduced muscle size and weakness. Now, you saw in a video earlier a girl named Kayla who has MS and how she utilizes her exercise to help keep herself healthy. But what they can do is you can also use steroid injections on patients with multiple sclerosis to help them with those weakened muscle moments. So then it helps build up their muscle strength and it actually helps with their muscles in the sense that it fatigues a lot less. So hopefully you've understood what is a fast twitch, what is a slow twitch, what are the conditions that cause muscle fatiguing, and how are some of the ways we can go about making sure that we don't have muscle fatigue. If you have any questions, please let me know.